Welcome to MPUNGWE-PUNGWE YouTube channel. Subscribe for you to enjoy more of our videos anytime we upload.
Mr. Speaker, before turning to the specifics of the proposed budget, it is important that we pin this discussion within the broader economic realities facing our country. Recent assessments by international institutions, including the World Bank's Malawi Economic Monitor, highlight that Malawi is currently navigating three interrelated macroeconomic crises. The first one, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the fiscal deficit crisis, where we continue to pass budgets with no fiscal space to allow government investment in productive areas. The second crisis being the balance of payment crisis, where we are importing 6 or 7 times more than what we are exporting. And the last crisis being the debt crisis, where the per capita debt on the shoulders of Malawians is between 1 and 1.2 million per head. Mr. Speaker, sir, as a renowned scholar once cautioned, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. In addressing the economic challenges confronting Malawi, yesterday's logic will not work, and Malawi needs to relook its approach and embrace political and economic reforms transformative enough to change our trajectory. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, starts with avoiding the very mistakes of the past that have brought us to this situation. The fiscal deficit crisis, Mr. Speaker, sir, for many years, government expenditure has consistently exceeded domestic revenue, resulting in large and persistent fiscal deficits. These deficits have increasingly been financed through borrowing, particularly from domestic sources. As a result, fiscal space has become severely constrained, with a significant share of domestic revenue now absorbed by mandatory obligations such as wages, pensions, and interest payments. On the public debt crisis, years of sustained borrowing to finance fiscal deficits have significantly increased the country's debt burden. Rising interest payments have increasingly crowded out resources that would otherwise support development programs and public service delivery. The balance of payment crisis, Malawi continues to face persistent foreign exchange shortages arising from structurally weak export base and high dependence on imports. The country's export basket remains heavily concentrated in a few primary commodities, while demand for foreign currency to finance fuel, fertilizer, and industrial inputs continue to rise. This imbalance has resulted in chronic shortages of foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, sir, these three crises are not isolated problems. They reinforce one another. Persistent fiscal deficits increase borrowing. Rising borrowing increases debt serving charges. And high debt servicing reduces the resources available to address structural weaknesses in the economy, including the very export constraints that contribute to the balance of payment pressures. Left unaddressed, if this generation does not rise up and unite to address these crises vis-à-vis the deficit budgets, the debt distress, and the negative balance of payments, Malawi will be stuck in this state of quagmire for generations. Mr. Speaker, sir, in light of this context, the Budget Committee's analysis and report attempts to guide the House on whether the proposed budget meaningfully addresses these structural crises above. Allow me now to move to the committee's analysis, Mr. Speaker, sir, starting with a general macroeconomic outlook. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me begin by acknowledging developments in the global economy and the sub-Saharan African region. The committee notes the global economic environment remains relatively stable, with global growth projected at 3.3% in 2026, whilst the sub-Saharan Africa is expected to grow at about 4.6%. In the domestic economy, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Minister has projected a fiscalized GDP of 4.1% for the 2026-2027 financial year. While the committee notes this projection, our analysis focuses on the annual real GDP growth as presented in the annual economic report, which provides a clearer picture of economic performance across calendar years. According to these projections, real GDP growth is expected to increase from 2.7% in 2025 to 3.8% in 2026 and 4.9% in 2027. Mr. Speaker, sir, whilst these projections suggest a gradual recovery, the committee observes that improvements in overall GDP growth have not translated into comparable improvements in income levels for Malawians. According to International Monetary Fund estimates, the Malawi's annual GDP per capita is projected to, or at approximately US $721, translating to $60 per month, which is $2 per day per person in 2026. This is significantly lower than that of some of our regional neighbors. By comparison, Zambia's annual GDP per capita is estimated at about $1,523 US, whilst Zimbabwe's stands at approximately $3,127. For Zambia, it is 2.1 times more than Malawi, and for Zimbabwe is 4.3 times than Malawi. This comparison highlights the substantial income gap between Malawi and neighboring economies, underscoring the slow pace at which growth is translating into improved living standards for the Malawian population. In this regard, the committee observes that growth without rising income risks becoming a statistical recovery rather than a lived economic transformation for a common Malawian. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee also observes that the structure of the economy remains largely unchanged. Agriculture continues to account for approximately 21% of GDP, while other sectors expected to drive structural transformation such as mining and manufacturing remain underdeveloped. Mining, for example, contributes less than 1% of the GDP, whilst manufacturing has remained largely stagnant at around 11%. The committee therefore emphasizes the need for deliberate policy actions and sustained investments to unlock the potential of these sectors to meaningfully transform the economy. Allow me, Right Honorable Speaker, to move to the monetary sector. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee also reviewed developments in the monetary sector and notes that inflationary pressures remain elevated. Inflation averaged 27.6% during the period under review, reflecting persistent pressures on households' purchasing power. The committee further observes that while food inflation has shown significant moderation, non-food inflation has continued to rise, reaching 29.8% in January 2026, compared to 22.1% for food inflation. Mr. Speaker, sir, the persistence of these inflationary pressures suggests that monetary policy alone may not be sufficient to restore price stability. The committee acknowledges the ongoing efforts to reduce domestic borrowing, as the deficit in this budget has dropped from 11% of GDP to 9%. The committee also takes note of efforts to mop up excess liquidity, with broad money growth easing to 38.2% in January 2026, and this is in the context that it had expanded to close to 52% year-on-year mid-2025. Right Honorable Speaker, when money supply expands faster than the growth of goods and services in the economy, it leads to inflationary pressures. In order to sustain the downward trend on headline inflation, the committee emphasizes the need for stronger coordination between the fiscal and the monetary policy, supported by sustained fiscal discipline and improved expenditure control. Allow me to go to the external sector. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee further examined developments in the external sector and expresses concern regarding the continued volatility of the foreign exchange reserves and the structural weaknesses in Malawi's export base. Although the trade balance showed some improvement largely due to increased tobacco export proceeds, the committee notes that Malawi remains heavily reliant on a narrow range of primary commodities. This concentration exposes the economy to external shocks and contributes to persistent foreign exchange shortages that constrain industrial activity. The committee therefore emphasizes the urgent need to diversify the export base, particularly by unlocking the potential of the mining sector and strengthening the value addition in agriculture. Allow me now, Mr. Speaker, sir, to provide an analysis of the performance of the 2025-2026 budget. I will begin by revenues. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee's review shows a generally positive outturn as total revenue slightly exceeded the revised target by 1.25%, with government correcting 5.528 trillion against the revised target of 5.460 trillion. This was mainly driven by improvements in both tax and non-tax revenues. However, the committee particularly noted that parastatal dividends continued to underperform, missing their target by 41.2% despite an already modest projection. Mr. Speaker, this is a long-standing problem, and several of these institutions continue to operate at a loss whilst accumulating liabilities to the government, often resulting in periodic bailouts. And the committee is aware that there are a lot of inefficiencies that affect service delivery which need to be addressed. And further to this, the committee calls upon the government to stick to its policy on cost-reflective pricing of the services to ensure their financial sustainability. However, in doing this, there is a need for deliberate action to ensure low-income earners are protected. On the expenditure side, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee also positively noted a saving as preliminary expenditure outturn for the 2025-2026 financial year is 8.43 trillion, which is 1.8% lower than the revised budget of 8.59 trillion. This House will therefore not be needing a supplementary budget as spending was within what Parliament had approved or appropriated. This is commendable effort. Mr. Speaker, sir, I will now turn to the committee's analysis of the 2026-2027 budget proposals, and let me begin with revenue projections. The committee notes that the revenue projections appear highly optimistic. The government expects to collect 8.126 trillion during this year, representing 48.8% increase in total revenue from the 2025-2026 revised estimates of 5.460 trillion. Of these projected revenues, 79.4% are domestic revenues, whilst 20.5% are grants. Mr. Speaker, sir, domestic revenue is projected at 6.455 trillion, reflecting a 44.2% increase from the revised target. Of these, tax revenues are the largest share, projected at 6.203 trillion, representing a 43.3% increase from the revised estimate. The committee notes that this growth is largely expected to come from the major tax heads such as payee, VAT, corporate tax, which together accounted for 72% of the total tax revenue. Mr. Speaker, sir, non-tax revenue continue to contribute minimally to revenues. It is projected at 250.5 billion, representing only 3.9% of all the domestic revenues. Mr. Speaker, the committee discussed a number of suggestions with regard to revenue generation, and the committee's view is that sustainable revenue growth must come from expanding the tax base rather than repeatedly taxing the very same taxpayers. The government should therefore focus on bringing in more individuals and more businesses into the formal tax system, and tackling informality in our economy should be a priority. The untaxed rely on our loose enforcement of tax laws in order to evade tax. On non-tax revenue, the committee believes that there is potential to increase these significantly, and hence we make the following suggestions. Departmental fees. The committee urges the government to review departmental fees that have remained unchanged for many years, as these represent an important but underutilized source of revenue. To date, someone with a 300 million kwacha Toyota VXR pays 36,000 kwacha per year for a certificate of fitness. Smaller cars are pegged at 30,000 kwacha per year certificate of fitness. The committee reiterates its position that taxation must be progressive to ensure fairness and economic balance. A progressive tax system asks those with greater financial capacity to contribute a larger share whilst protecting the lower income households from disproportionate burden. Parastatal dividends. The committee stresses the need to improve the financial performance of parastatal institutions through stronger governance and operational efficiency and cost-effective pricing. If you look at the travel budget for some of these parastatals and compare with the dividends they declare at the end of the year, you would know that we lack seriousness in these institutions. Targets. In order to improve revenue mobilization for infrastructure development, the committee recommends expansion of the target network along all high traffic corridors. For comparison's sake, Zambia has 38 targets, 27 inland and 11 on ports of entry like airports. Here we have 3 or 4 at most. That said, Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to zero in on the surcharges that have been introduced on seed importation particularly. The committee understands that this has been introduced to protect local producers and it is in full support. However, the committee also notes that the government has allocated 60 billion to support local seed production in this budget. It is the committee's view that since farmers still need seed for both winter cropping and the next season, the committee considers the measure premature, as it may increase seed prices before domestic production capacity expands sufficiently to meet demand. It is therefore the view of the committee that this measure be delayed to next year, when local seed production would have led to an increased seed supply on the market. Otherwise, seed prices are going to be above reach for most of our farmers. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee also observes that there is need for a delicate balance between taxing financial or digital transactions and achieving financial inclusion. We should not reach a point where someone is tempted to start keeping his or her money under the pillow instead of keeping the money at the bank. In all of these efforts, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to ensure that taxation remains fair, progressive, and does not place excessive burden on a small segment of Malawians, especially the low-income bracket. I will now discuss the total projected expenditure for 2026-2027. Mr. Speaker, sir, expenditure in the 2026-2027 proposed budget continues its upward trajectory, and the proposed budget projects total expenditure of 10.978 trillion, representing 27.7% increase from the revised estimate of 8.589 trillion in 2025-2026. Positively, revenues are projected to grow significantly higher than expenditure, which signals a narrowing fiscal gap and an important step towards restoring fiscal discipline. This outcome depends heavily on the realization of the ambitious revenue and growth projections underpinning the budget. Should these projections fall short, the fiscal position could deteriorate and result in higher than anticipated deficits, and the committee therefore stresses the importance of strict expenditure controls, effective revenue mobilization, and investment in growth-enhanced investments. On recruitment expenditure, the budget projects spending of 7.581 trillion, amounting to 69% of the total budget. Notably, the committee welcomes the projected positive primary balance of 302.0 billion compared to the historic trend of persistent negative primary balances. A primary balance, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the difference between the government revenue and government spending that excludes interest payments on existing debts. If the primary balance is negative, it simply means government will have to be borrowing in order to meet debt interests. If positive, it means government is generating enough revenue to partly start covering the debt charges. This, therefore, is commendable development, and if sustained, this trend would strengthen fiscal discipline, reduce reliance on borrowing for operational spending, and gradually create fiscal space for development and essential public services. Despite this positive signal, mandatory expenditures continue to consume a significant share of government's revenue. And Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to briefly comment on few key recurrent expenditure lines: wages and salaries. Mr. Speaker, sir, the allocation to wages and salaries has increased by 17.9%, largely to cater for possible salary adjustments and selected recruitments. The committee appreciates government's effort to manage the wage bill, including freezing of non-essential recruitments, and hope that the ongoing salary negotiations have been adequately provided for to avoid significant upward revisions during the mid-term review. Public debt. Mr. Speaker, sir, the rapid growth in public debt interest payments remain a major concern to the committee. Interest payments are projected to rise to 2.793 trillion in the 2026-2027 financial year, of which 97.7% is attributed to domestic debt. These payments alone are expected to consume approximately 43% of total domestic revenues, thereby significantly constraining the fiscal space available for development spending and essential public services. Mr. Speaker, sir, Malawi's total public debt stock stood at 24.3 trillion, equivalent to 93.2% of our GDP as of December 2025, with domestic debt accounting for 65.8% of the total. On a per capita basis, this debt stock translates to roughly 1.1 million to 1.2 million per Malawian, even Lero in our hospitals. The committee therefore emphasizes the urgent need to expedite the ongoing debt restructuring or reprofiling through a consultative and transparent approach, ensuring that the outcome restores fiscal sustainability whilst at the same time safeguarding the stability of the financial institutions that hold a significant portion of government securities. On social benefits, Mr. Speaker, sir, allocations to social benefits have declined by 31.8%, mainly due to the reduction in the Farm Input Subsidy Program, FISIP, from 214.1 billion in the revised of 2025-2026 budget to 111.25 billion in the 26-27. Considering that beneficiaries were expanded to 1.1 million households during the mid-year review, the committee seeks clarification on how this reduction will affect the number of beneficiaries under the program and design. The committee reiterates its position that Malawi cannot afford to be a welfare economy. Our fiscal space is too constrained. On development expenditure, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee noted a positive shift towards increased investment with allocations projected to 3.397 trillion, representing a 76% increase from the previous year. This raises the share of development spending to 30.9% of the total budget from 22.4% in the revised budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, a significant portion of this increase is driven by the reformed Constituency Development Fund. As indicated in the Honourable Minister's statement, the reformed CDF will operate under the performance-based framework, where local councils will be accessing funds based on their capacity and performance against agreed indicators. However, the committee is concerned about reports of limited capacity among local councils to absorb and manage these resources effectively. The committee therefore stresses the need for deliberate investment in strengthening the capacity of local councils. Without such improvements, the expanded CDF framework could pose serious fiscal risks. The committee therefore looks forward to the guidelines being formulated, which will be key in assessing the feasibility of the program. Much attention will have to go to the oversight functions, and I believe this House is better placed to do its constitutional mandate. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to briefly touch on selected sectors that are critical for driving economic growth and the national development, starting with the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee notes that the agriculture sector experienced under expenditure in 2025-2026, particularly in development projects, suggesting limited investment in long-term productivity. In the 2026-2027 budget, the sector has been allocated 1.05 trillion, though a large share is donor-funded, and resources for recurrent operations have declined, mainly due to the downscaling of the FISIP program. The committee emphasizes the need to strengthen irrigation, value addition, and structured agricultural markets to improve productivity and resilience. The mining sector. Mr. Speaker, sir, the mining sector grew by 5.3%, but its contribution to the economy remains low at 0.8% of GDP. The 352 billion allocation to the energy and mining sector, together with new institutions such as MAMICO and the Mining and Minerals Regulatory Authority, present an opportunity to unlock the sector's potential. However, this will require strong governance, technical capacity, and supporting infrastructure like roads and energy. Tourism sector. Mr. Speaker, sir, tourism remains an underutilized sector despite Malawi's rich natural attractions, and the 2026-2027 budget allocates 51.2 billion to the tourism and manufacturing sector for tourism promotion, product development, and wildlife conservation. However, the sector continues to face structural challenges such as limited international flights, high travel costs, and inadequate infrastructure, which limits its contribution to economic growth and foreign exchange earnings. The education sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, continues to face challenges in infrastructure investment, and the 2025-2026 expenditure is projected at 1 trillion against the provision of 1.03 trillion. With underspending on development projects and negligible domestic investment. Wages and salaries dominate 68% of the education budget, whilst donor support has sharply declined over the last 3 years. The 26-27 budget allocates 1.28 trillion, largely for recurrent costs, underscoring continued underinvestment in infrastructure. The committee argues that the free primary and secondary education, coupled with population growth, must be supported by significant infrastructure expansion and maintenance. And lastly, on the health sector, Mr. Speaker, sir, the health sector has seen notable achievements, including recruitment of nearly 6,000 health workers and completion of critical projects like the radiotherapy bunkers. The 2026-27 budget allocates 1.02 trillion with funds earmarked for medicines, hospital support, dialysis, ambulances, blood services, and ART co-financing. However, challenges remain, including infrastructure gaps, personnel shortages, and rising demand for services. The committee welcomes the introduction of paying wards and partnerships with medical insurance providers to mobilize additional resources, improve service quality, and reinvest in hospital infrastructure. Allow me, Right Honourable Speaker, to zero in on the key recommendations from the Budget Committee on the 2026-2027 budget. First recommendation: in order to address the persistent trade imbalance, the committee emphasizes the need to move beyond policy rhetoric to decisively start implementing productive and export-oriented reforms. The government should prioritize a few well-resourced flagship initiatives, focusing on value addition, agro-processing, and export-oriented manufacturing to expand production, diversify exports, and strengthen foreign exchange earnings. Second recommendation. The committee commends the decline in money supply from the growth of 42.9% in December 2025 to 38.2% in January 2026, reflecting progress in containing excess liquidity. The committee urges that measures be taken to sustain this trend over time. 3. Regarding the surcharge on imported seed, the committee recommends delaying its implementation to next year, allowing local seed production to expand and increase supply on the market. 4. On broadening the revenue base, the committee calls upon government to prioritize bringing in more individuals and businesses to the tax net, especially those in the informal sector and emerging industries such as entertainment and event services. 5. The committee recommends enhancing non-tax revenue through measures such as constructing additional targets, revising departmental fees, and improving parastatal performance via stronger governance and cost-reflective pricing whilst protecting low-income households. 6. On development spending, particularly domestically funded projects, the committee advises the government to prioritize completion of ongoing high-impact projects rather than creating new ones to avoid escalating costs and inefficiencies. 7. Regarding the reformed Constituency Development Fund, the committee urges deliberate efforts to strengthen the capacity of local councils to manage expanded allocations, and we also look forward to the finalization of the guidelines that safeguard public resources and ensure meaningful development outcomes. 8. The government should ensure that any additional revenue during the fiscal year is partly directed towards reducing the budget deficit and public debt rather than automatically increasing expenditure to ease the fiscal pressures and strengthen sustainability. And lastly, on domestic debt, the committee emphasizes the need to expedite debt restructuring through a consultative, open, and transparent process, ensuring fiscal sustainability whilst protecting the stability of financial institutions. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, sir, this budget has one more crisis it must address: corruption, theft, and fraud. Malawi is creating fraudometers at a much faster pace. We have too many supreme leaders of corruption, and this budget needs to consider enough resources towards our anti-corruption, fraud, and money laundering institutions. Our institutions like SCB, Fiscal Police, and FIA must be capacitated to detect, investigate, and decisively deal with all fraudometers or supreme rulers of Katangale. Otherwise, a well-crafted budget like this one may once again go to waste. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now beg to move that this report be agreed to. I beg to move.
Thank you very much, Chair of Budget Committee. Any member of the committee to second the report?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Your constituency, Honorable?
Nkata-Bempamba constituency.
Nkata-Bempamba, proceed.
Thank you. Nkata-Bempamba. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for granting me this opportunity to second the report by Budget and Finance Committee following the analysis we made as a committee of 2026-2027 national budget that was presented in this House by Honorable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, sir, Let me start that the committee appreciate the challenges that Minister of Finance and his team, when they were preparing this budget, they already had the number of cost lines, expenditure lines, which were must that they have to go into the budget. Minister of Finance was preparing this budget as outlined by the chairperson. The difficult macroeconomic environment, Malawi continue to face significant structural challenges, and as the chair has put it, like rising debt level, foreign currency shortages. So when they were making this budget, there were various challenges which the Budget and Finance Committee understands. This made, Mr. Speaker, sir, that when he was making this budget, there was a limited amount of money to be allocated to development activities like construction of roads, bridges, and even to public service delivery. When he was making this budget, Mr. Speaker, sir, Minister of Finance had a difficult job because the debt level was high. Amount to pay interest was very high, making it difficult to make a very developmental-related focused budget. Having said these challenges, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee, also as highlighted by the chairperson, made various recommendations. I'll just pick one or two. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that our economy is more of agriculture-based, depend on agriculture. And as the chair has put it, we need to diversify our economy to go in other sectors like mining, which is greatly underfunded. We need also to expand our net. We should not just rely on agriculture only. We should also diversify to tourism. You know, tourism has got potential to bring the forex which this country needs. And as the chair has put it, Mr. Speaker, sir, we need also to focus on diversifying to industrialization, creating more factories, creating more products, which as a country we can start exporting to other countries. Mr. Speaker, sir, yes, we have been relying on agriculture, but the time has come that we start putting in place policies, we start diversifying, we start putting more resources to areas which can supplement, which can move our economy out of the status it is now. All the forums who have been attending, Mr. Speaker, sir, they call our economy as junkie economy, which we are not proud of to be called a junkie economy. But we can get out of this junkie economy if we diversify to the mining, as I've already said, to tourism, as well as to industrialization. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know this budget, 2026-2027 budget, for it to be very effective, we continue to recommend to Minister of Finance to put strict measures when it comes to expenditure. So we need strict controls on expenditure. At the same time, you know, we are relying on revenue, which will be collected by Malawi Revenue Authority. And for us to achieve what is in the budget, which means we need to realize the revenue which has been projected in the budget. If we don't realize this revenue, which means 2026-2027 budget will not meet its targets. Mr. Speaker, sir, we also need to push on reducing the level of public debt. The minister is already doing a great job. He started doing debt restructuring, and we are seeing the results. Now the banks, the money which the government borrows from the banking sector is now going down. What it means, Mr. Speaker, sir, the banks have got more money, and now the banks have started channeling this money to the private sector. But we need to follow it up as well, that this private sector should not just be borrowing this money for consumption. We need to engage the private sector when they're borrowing this money to invest much of this money to industrialization, to producing more products which can be exported. We need to diversify to more products which we need to export to other countries. As a country, we struggle with Forex just because we are not producing enough.
Welcome to MPUNGWE-PUNGWE YouTube channel. Subscribe for you to enjoy more of our videos anytime we upload.